Hey guys, tonight we dive into the world of Japanese tales, so before you get comfy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. So, kick back and relax as we immerse into this magical journey together. So with that being said, let's go.
In the age when the veil between realms was no thicker than a spider's thread, the world swelled with divine breath. Kagami-hime, the high plane of heaven, shimmered like golden mist above Ashihara no Nakatsuki, the reed plain of Middle-earth. The 8 million kami, spirits of sea and sky, grove and hearth, moved among mortals, whispering blessings into saplings and stirring rain from still clouds. It was an age of harmony, where even shadows served the balance of light. But somewhere between heaven's gentle radiance and earth's sacred rhythms, that balance began to falter. Far from the celestial palaces and great stone shrines, nestled in a hidden mountain glade, stood a modest wooden torii gate, half consumed by moss and time. A single cherry tree arched above it, its blossoms pink as a newborn's breath. Behind the gate, in the heart of the glade, was a spring of such clarity that it mirrored the stars even under a noonday sun. From this spring rose the kami of first waters, Kagami-hime, the mirror princess. Her form was delicate, but not weak. Midnight blue hair cascaded down her back like liquid shadow, and her eyes gleamed like deep pools, reflecting whatever truths the world dared reveal. Clad in pale silks and ribbons of flowing streamlight, she moved with the hush of falling petals, never raising her voice above the murmur of her spring. Her shrine was little more than polished stones and sacred ropes, yet pilgrims came from distant provinces to kneel beside her waters. Sick children were cradled at the spring's edge. Broken-hearted lovers whispered regrets to the wind. Wandering monks would press their foreheads to the rocks, weeping in silence. And always, they left lighter, clearer, as though some inner grime had been washed clean. But the spring had changed. Kagami-hime noticed it first in the water's heartbeat. Once vibrant and full of laughter, it had grown slow, cold. Its song, once bright as wind chimes, now carried a hollow undertone. She stood at the edge one dusk, hands submerged, frowning softly as her fingertips met a subtle resistance. A faint slick, like oil on water, danced across the surface in ribbons of gray. "The world is unwell," she murmured to herself. Birdsong had faded from the valley, and the fish in the stream swam listlessly near the bottom, refusing to rise even for falling blossoms. Kagami-hime knelt beside an old cedar, placing her ear to its bark. No voice. No whisper from the tree. Only silence, like something had closed the world's throat. That night, as moonlight filtered through the pine boughs, a wandering shrine maiden stumbled into the valley. Her robes were torn, her sandals shredded by briars, and her eyes wide with terror. Kagami-hime rushed to her side, laying a cool hand on her fevered brow. "Please," the girl rasped, clutching Kagami-hime's sleeve. The shrine, in the lowlands, gone. The stream turned black. "The priestess," she said. The water screamed before it died. Kagami-hime felt the cold slip deeper into her bones. She touched the girl's chest, her spirit was frayed, barely clinging. The spring's water, still mostly pure, glowed faintly in her cupped hands. She gave it to the maiden, and though her breath slowed and color returned to her cheeks, a shadow lingered behind her eyes. The next morning, Kagami-hime stood at the center of her glade, face lifted to the sky. "Amaterasu Amikami," she whispered, invoking the sun goddess herself, "I am but a drop in your vast light, but my spring runs dark. If the heavens know of this corruption, let me be shown the path. Let me serve the balance." For the first time in an age, the sunlight dimmed. Above the clouds, in the golden halls of Kagami-hime, the celestial palace trembled. Amaterasu, radiant in layered robes of starlight and flame, stood gazing into her polished obsidian mirror. Her warm face, normally serene, was tight with unease. Around her, the great kami gathered, stormy Susanoo with his wild mane and salt-stained blade, Stoic Tsukimi, clad in moon-silver and night fog, Omoikane, the wise, ever-thinking god of counsel. But it was Izanagi no Okami, the Sky Father, who finally spoke. His voice was low, rumbling like wind over ancient stones. "The world's soul is dimming," he said, eyes closed as if listening to something far away. "A darkness that predates even my breath stirs again. The Oboro Yami, the smog of oblivion." Gasps rippled through the assembled gods. From the mist at the edge of the chamber, a presence coalesced, neither form nor face, but the unmistakable weight of Izanami, the Earth Mother, long bound to Yomi, the land of the dead. She spoke without lips, her voice a drifting fog. "It is the Yami-no-Ryū," she intoned. "The dragon of darkness. Born not of malice, but of void. It does not destroy in anger, it unravels, because that is its nature." Amaterasu's hands clenched over her mirror. "My light cannot reach it. It is not shadow, but negation. What can counter that which is not?" Izanagi looked down into the mirror. And there, rippling like moonlight on a pond, was the image of Kagami-hime. "She is no warrior," he said gently. "But she is a source untainted by time. She is spring, unclouded. Purity itself. It must be her." And so, the call was sent. Kagami-hime did not dream often. Her spirit was usually too attuned to the currents of water and wind to fall fully into the deep sleep of mortals. But that night, she dreamed, and the dream was not her own. She stood not in her grove, but in a vast expanse of sky. Below her, stars drifted like lotus petals on a black sea. Above, the full moon pulsed with a pale radiance, and from its center, a thread of golden light descended. As it touched her brow, the sky shattered into a cascade of divine presence. Her breath caught. Before her stood Amaterasu herself, cloaked in robes that shifted like dawn, eyes like twin suns, serene and powerful. "Kagami-hime," the goddess said, her voice both thunder and lullaby, "child of the first waters, listener of the world's breath, mirror of the earth's sorrow, you have been seen." Kagami-hime fell to her knees. "Amaterasu Amikami. I am not worthy. I am but a spring beneath cedar boughs, humble, small." "Precisely," the goddess replied, bending down to touch her forehead. "It is because you are small that you are vast. You are untouched by pride. Your waters do not judge. They reflect. They purify. They endure." Another voice joined the dream, a deeper tone, rough and ancient. From behind the sun goddess emerged a towering figure cloaked in mist, wearing a crown of crumbling stone and starlight, Izanagi no Okami, the first of the kami, the one who carved the world from chaos. "The smog of oblivion rises," he said. "The Yami-no-Ryū seeks to return all to nothingness. It cannot be defeated by strength or sealed by words. Only purity, unwavering and living, can cleanse it. And I am to do this?" Kagami-hime asked softly, trembling. "You are not alone," Amaterasu assured her. "You will walk the world. You will awaken that which has been forgotten. The sacred treasures of our realm, truth, benevolence, and valor, will come to you, not as weapons, but as essences. They dwell not in artifacts, but in the heart. You must find them, gather them, become them." As she spoke, 3 lights spun around Kagami-hime, a brilliant orb of crystal that reflected everything it touched, a tear-shaped jewel that pulsed with warmth, and a blade of light that cut through the darkness without ever drawing blood. They hovered before her chest before vanishing into her spirit. "Let them awaken in you," Izanagi said. "But beware, the Yami-no-Ryū is ancient. It knows your kind. It will whisper to you, try to unmake you not by strength, but by doubt. You must hold fast. Then came the third presence, so subtle she had not noticed it before. A drifting wind, cold as nightfall. It coiled around her gently, and from it emerged a vision of Izanami no Mikoto. Though she was bound to Yomi, the underworld, her essence crossed into this dream space like dew slipping from a leaf. I will guide you, the Earth Mother whispered. Even from the land of shadows. For though I am lost to light, I am not lost to love. Kagami-hime reached out a hand, but the vision was already fading. The sky unraveled. The stars fell inward. The divine vanished. She awoke beside her spring, the light of dawn barely spilling over the mountains. For a long while, she sat in silence, the dream clinging to her like morning mist. Then, as the first birds began to sing again, weakly, but with hope, she dipped her hands into the spring. The water, once sluggish, now pulsed faintly with energy. Not healed, but responding. Awaiting. She rose. The forest knew she was leaving. As Kagami-hime moved beneath the arching limbs of cedar and pine, every leaf seemed to shimmer with emotion. Her sandals touched the moss-covered ground, and the roots stirred faintly. Even the insects paused in their buzzing, as though reluctant to see her go. Her shrine, always humble, now seemed almost mournful, its torii gate weathered but defiant, ropes of Shimenawa gently swaying in the breeze. She had wrapped herself in traveling robes, pure white, but tinged with blue at the edges, like moonlight on snow. Upon her back she carried only a small gourd filled with spring water, a mirror of polished riverstone wrapped in cloth, and a pouch of rice offerings. As she stepped beyond the edge of the glade, the air thickened. A figure appeared before her, a hunched old man in tattered robes, carrying a walking stick adorned with Ofuda charms. His beard was moss, his skin like bark. He leaned on his staff and regarded her with deep-set eyes like sap-filled knots. I am the Kodama of this forest, he croaked. I have watched you grow from mist. Where do you go, child of the spring? To cleanse the darkness that rises, she answered softly. To restore the balance. The darkness is old. Older than even the first seed, the Kodama said, circling her. It will twist what is sacred. Are you ready to see horror in beautiful things? To doubt what you love? I am afraid, she admitted. Good. The Kodama grinned. That means you will not forget who you are. He raised a gnarled hand, and the wind parted the trees, revealing a narrow path hidden between two crumbling stones. Follow this. It leads to the highlands. But know this, Kagami-hime, you cannot carry the light if you run from your own shadow. She bowed low. Thank you, honored spirit. He was already gone. The path he revealed was steep and treacherous. Roots clawed at her sandals. Fogs rolled in thick as silk, carrying voices that did not belong. Once, a shape loomed beside her, a woman weeping into her hands, her body covered in twisting vines. Kagami-hime stopped. What troubles you, sister? She asked gently. The figure lifted her face. Her eyes were empty sockets. Hope, she said, was a lie. Kagami-hime did not run. Instead, she reached into her pouch and placed a grain of rice in the woman's hand. Then let this be truth. The spirit blinked, faded like breath on glass, and was gone. Farther she traveled, and the higher she climbed, until the mists turned chill and the trees thinned into spindly guardians. At last, she reached the pass leading into the upper realm, the edge of the realm of the Tengu. And the air turned sharp as a blade. The pass wound upward like a serpent carved from stone, etched into the cliffs that guarded the highlands. Wind howled through the crevices, sharp, high, cold. Not merely weather, but an entity unto itself. Kagami-hime walked slowly, mindful of every step. Stones shifted beneath her feet like uncertain thoughts. The sky above grew darker, not with night, but with height. She had risen beyond the lands where mortals lived and into a domain half forgotten even by the kami. Her breath grew short. The air here was thinner, laced with the scent of snow and pine resin. When she paused to rest beneath a crooked tree bent by centuries of wind, she felt the first true pang of weariness. Her gourd of spring water pulsed faintly at her side, warm against her waist. It kept her anchored, her essence, her beginning. But the world around her was changing. From somewhere ahead, faint at first, came the low drumming of wings. Not birds. Larger. Heavier. With it came a faint rustle, like feathers brushing against bark and stone. Kagami-hime stood and walked on, her pulse steady but alert. She had been told that the Tengu dwelled here, the guardians of the mountain winds, warriors and tricksters both. Their wisdom was ancient. Their pride, formidable. When the trees finally parted to reveal a craggy plateau, she stopped. A line of Tengu stood before her, cloaked in cloaks of feather and smoke, faces half covered by masks carved from dark lacquered wood, some with long, beak-like noses, others with fierce scowls or smiling, unreadable visages. Their eyes, however, were unmasked, and sharp as flint. Their leader stood tallest, his hair long and white as powdered snow, his wings tucked behind him like folded night. "I am Karasutenga no Teisho, warden of the Whispering Pines," he said, voice like a storm held barely in check. "Why does a spring spirit climb the mountain of warriors?" Kagami-hime stepped forward, offering a respectful bow. "I am Kagami-hime, guardian of the first spring. I seek the shrine of Whispering Pines, where the essence of the Yasukani no Magatama once dwelled. I come by divine calling, to gather the essences that can purify the Oboro Yami." At the mention of that name, a few Tengu shifted, uneasy. Karasutengu's gaze narrowed. "You speak of the smog of oblivion? That which has poisoned rivers, silenced winds, and driven kami to madness? You seek to fight that?" "I seek to cleanse it," she said. "Cleanse?" he laughed, but there was no amusement in it. "Child, you bring a flickering lantern into a hurricane. You will only scatter your own light. I would rather lose myself in the attempt than do nothing while the world unravels." The plateau grew quiet. After a long pause, the Tengu leader gestured. "Very well. But we do not guide the untested. If you wish passage, you must face the trial of wind and reflection. We will test your spirit, not your strength, for you have none of that, but your core. Should it break, you will be lost here, your soul scattered on the mountainside." Kagami-hime bowed again. "I accept." He turned and swept his fan toward a path veiled in mist. "Then follow." The Tengu led her to a narrow cliffside corridor carved into the spine of the mountain. Wind shrieked along its length, loud enough to drown thought. Here, the Tengu halted, and Karasutenga placed something into her hands, a small mirror, rimmed in silver, no larger than a plum blossom. "This is the wind mirror," he said. "Face it within the trial hollow. See what the wind shows you. Only if you return with your spirit intact shall we guide you to the shrine." The others fell away, vanishing into the fog like ghosts. Kagami-hime entered the hollow. It was a cave, dome-shaped, open to the sky. The wind howled down through a single crack above, and the air inside spun like a cyclone. Her hair and robes lifted around her, caught in the vortex. She stepped to the center and held up the mirror. At first, she saw only her reflection, her face pale, lips slightly parted, eyes calm but strained. Then the mirror shimmered, rippling like water. The wind changed. It no longer howled without direction, it whispered. Do you think you can save them? The voice was her own. Yet it wasn't. It came from the mirror, but also from her heart. It asked without malice, only truth, sharpened to a blade's edge. The mirror darkened. Reflected in it now was the valley of her shrine, burning. The cherry tree was blackened. The spring had boiled dry, its stones cracked. Pilgrims lay collapsed on the path. No birds sang. This is what awaits, said the voice. You will fail. Kagami-hime closed her eyes. Perhaps. But I walk forward regardless. The wind surged, harsher now, whipping around her. Another vision, herself, alone in a dark plain, her hands stained with blood. Her spring water turned black in her gourd. The kami of the forests turned away from her. Amaterasu's face vanished from the sky. You are not enough, said the wind. You are too small. Too soft. What power does purity have against the void? She wept. But even as tears fell, she remained standing. Even if I am small, she whispered, I will be as water, enduring. Even if I am soft, I will be as water, shaping stone. Even if I am only a mirror, I will reflect the light, no matter how distant. The mirror glowed. The wind quieted. And in its stillness, the mirror showed not despair, but the image of a single drop of water falling into darkness, creating ripples that pushed the shadows outward. She emerged from the cave hours later, the mirror held to her heart. Her robes were torn. Her hair wild. But her eyes, clearer than ever. Karasatengu stood waiting, arms folded. Well, he asked. I saw the storm within, she said. And I did not look away. The old Tengu stared at her for a long time. Then, with a nod, he lifted his fan and pointed skyward. The shrine of whispering pines lies beyond the ridge. Come. You have earned the path. The path beyond the trial hollow was not made of stone or earth, but of wind and memory. Kagami-hime followed the Tengu across a narrow causeway where pine trees, ancient beyond reckoning, clung to cliffs like monks to prayer. Their limbs were bowed with snow, and yet their needles sang faintly in the breeze, a sound older than language, the voice of the mountain itself. Mist clung low along the path, veiling the world below in a rolling ocean of white, as if she walked upon the clouds. The Tengu moved silently, gliding more than walking. Karasutengu no Taisho alone turned to glance back at her now and then, watching not with suspicion, but with something that might have been respect. At last, they arrived at a clearing encircled by pine trees so vast they blotted out the sky. Each trunk was as thick as a temple pillar, bark marked with old offerings, faded paper prayers, broken fans, cracked masks, bits of jade. The ground was carpeted with fallen needles, muffling sound. At the heart of the grove stood a shrine so old it seemed to have grown there, not been built. It was not made of timber or thatch, but of living pine, grown into the shape of an altar, its branches forming a natural torii gate above. Behind the altar, a single pine tree rose higher than the rest, its bark silvered, its needles glowing faintly blue in the mountain air. The whispering pine. Karasutengu stepped aside and gestured for Kagami-hime to approach. The shrine has been dormant since the last age of storm, he said softly. No kami has dared wake it since the Oboro Yami last stirred. If the Magatama's essence still lingers, it will not come easily. Not to anyone. Not even to you. Kagami-hime bowed, then stepped forward alone. As she crossed beneath the living torii gate, a sudden warmth spread through her chest. Not heat, but memory. The kind that stirs at a mother's lullaby or the echo of laughter in a long-abandoned home. She knelt before the altar and placed her gourd of spring water beside her, hands resting on her knees. The grove fell silent. Even the wind paused. She closed her eyes and let her breath slow. In. Out. Like the spring itself. She reached inward, past the fear, the fatigue, the doubts still clinging to the corners of her soul. She let herself remember her purpose, not as a grand destiny, but as a promise. A vow whispered to the world, that she would serve it, no matter how vast the darkness. And then, the pine tree behind the altar sighed. The needles stirred, though no wind blew. A blue-green light pulsed from within the trunk. Slowly, a sound emerged, not a voice, but a tone, like a single chime struck beneath the world. It vibrated in her bones. A whisper spoke, soft and clear, not from without but from the pine, from the altar, from the earth beneath her. Benevolence is not kindness. Kagami-hime's eyes opened. What is it then? The voice replied, still without sound, it is the will to nourish. The grace to give, even to the undeserving. To restore, even when wounded. To forgive, even when broken. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming tenderness of the voice. It was like being held by something greater than form, like the first breath after birth. The altar cracked open. From within, rising like mist from bark, came a sphere of faint, glowing light. It hovered above the altar, spinning slowly, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. It was not the jewel itself, but its essence, the sacred principle that had once been bound within the Yasakani no Magatama. She reached toward it. The moment her fingers touched the glow, her vision flooded with images. A river spirit cradling a drowning fox cub. A dying farmer offering his last rice to a passing monk. A mother kami singing lullabies to children she would never birth, just to calm a frightened village. The moon watching over the earth every night, never demanding to be seen. The essence sank into her chest. Kagami-hime gasped. She felt warmth bloom in her spirit, not like fire, but like sunlight on frozen soil. It spread through her, curling around her heart, seeping into her spring water, her bones, her breath. For a moment, she felt the entire mountain pulse with her, as if the roots of the pines and the veins of the world had aligned. She rose, slowly. Behind her, Karasatengu and the others had bowed their heads. Even they, proud as they were, could feel the shift. She turned and approached them. Karasatengu looked up and nodded. The essence has accepted you. Kagami-hime inclined her head, speaking softly. It is not mine. I merely carry it. He smirked faintly. That humility may serve you better than any blade. Now go. The mountain will grant you passage. Before she left, Kagami-hime stood once more beneath the great pine. She placed her hands on its trunk and whispered, "Thank you." The pine did not speak, but its needles shivered, and a single cone fell at her feet. She picked it up, a gift. A blessing. She tucked it into her robes, and turned to descend the mountain. As she stepped back into the misty path, the air seemed warmer. The whispering winds no longer carried doubt, but quiet encouragement. The first step of her sacred journey was complete. She carried now the essence of benevolence. Kagami-hime descended the mountain under a sky of deepening blue. The winds behind her had softened to a whisper, and with the Magatama's essence now dwelling in her spirit, the world felt subtly changed. Not easier, but clearer. The sorrow of the land was still there, thick as summer rain, but it no longer pressed against her heart as before. The warmth of benevolence, now woven through her breath, gave her the strength to meet sorrow without drowning in it. Her path curved downward into a lowland shrouded in fog. The sky narrowed, trees pressing in as though reluctant to let her pass. The wind died entirely, and in its absence, silence took root, so complete it rang in her ears. The world had become hushed, not with peace, but with secrets. This was the forest of echoing silence. It was no ordinary forest. The air held a stillness that bordered on oppressive, and yet it was filled with presence, a watching, waiting awareness that prickled across her skin. Every leaf shimmered faintly. The trees here were ancient, but their bark was smooth, like mirror-polished stone, and they grew in twisted, spiral patterns. The forest floor was thick with moss and silence. She took careful steps forward, her sandals sinking softly into the moss, her mirror stone tucked at her side. Her gourd of spring water pulsed faintly, comforting, steady. This was the domain of the kitsune. Once, the fox spirits had been mischievous and wise, guardians of thresholds and messengers of the divine. But with the rise of the Oboro Yami, even they had become unstable, their illusions poisoned by doubt, their riddles twisted into labyrinths of despair. As she ventured deeper, the air grew colder, but not from temperature. It was the chill of being observed. She passed through a grove of white-barked trees, their limbs arching overhead like ribs. A faint giggle sounded, just behind her. She turned, but saw no one. Another step, and a whisper came from the left. Why does the little spring walk into the forest of lies? She kept walking. Does she seek truth? The voice asked, amused. Or only comfort? The forest ahead shifted. The path curved in ways it had not before. Trees moved when she wasn't watching. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. Illusions had begun. Kagami-hime closed her eyes and breathed slowly, drawing on the Magatama's warmth. Do not react. Do not chase ghosts. She opened her eyes, and found herself standing before a small version of her own shrine. Cherry blossoms fell from invisible branches. Her spring gurgled beside it, untouched. There she stood, a second self, kneeling by the water. For a moment, she felt herself drawn toward it. Was it a memory? A homecoming? Then she saw it, barely perceptible. The water in this spring rippled outward rather than inward. And her double's eyes did not reflect light. She bowed. Your illusion is skillful, she said aloud. The scene shimmered. Her double rose, smiling with too many teeth, and faded into smoke. You are clever, little Kami, said a voice. But truth is not found by denying what you see. It is found by knowing why you see it. A fox stepped forward from the shadows. Its fur was a mottled silver and black, its many tails flickering with foxfire. Its eyes were the color of old moonlight, clever, dangerous, tired. I am Senso, oldest of the forest's remaining fox spirits, it said. Long ago, we danced in laughter under starlight. Now, we guard echoes of things no one wants to hear. Kagami-hime bowed. Honored Senso. I seek the truth that lies within this forest. The essence of the Yata no Kagami. I was told it dwells here, not as a thing, but a principle. Senso circled her slowly, nose twitching. Many come seeking truth. Few survive it. Truth is not what you want it to be. It does not heal, it reveals. Even the gods flinch from it. I do not seek comfort, Kagami-hime replied. Only clarity. Then follow, the kitsune said, flicking his tails. He led her deeper into the woods. The trees grew stranger, no longer bark and branch, but shapes of memory. She passed a tree that looked like her childhood self carved from wood, weeping. Another was shaped like her father figure, the old river Kami who once taught her songs. His wooden eyes were shut. Senso spoke over his shoulder. This forest does not create illusions. It reflects what lies within. The forest is a mirror. A distorted one, but a mirror all the same. They arrived at a clearing. In its center was a pool, not of water, but of darkness. It was perfectly still, perfectly circular, and emitted no light of its own. "This is the mirror of Oboro," Senso said. "Here, the darkness reflects you back. Not the you show others. The real you. The one even you deny." Kagami-hime stepped toward it. The surface did not move. She saw no reflection. Senso continued, quieter now. "To reach the Yata no Kagami, you must see yourself within the darkness, and not turn away. It is the only way to see truth unclouded." She knelt by the pool. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unstoppered her gourd. Her spring water, still glowing faintly with the Magatama's warmth, rippled with anticipation. She poured a single drop into the mirror pool. The darkness shimmered. Then, it began to move. Her reflection emerged, not her body, but her soul. And it was not pure. It was filled with doubt, with sorrow, with loneliness. It wept for the burden she carried. It feared failure. It resented being chosen. It wanted rest. Kagami-hime's breath hitched. Tears welled again, but she did not look away. She bowed to her reflection. "I see you. I honor you. You are part of me. But you do not own me." The reflection reached toward her, and dissolved. The mirror turned clear. And within it appeared a shape, a perfect circle of 8 radiating rays, simple, silent, radiant. The essence of the Yata no Kagami, the mirror of truth. It rose from the surface, weightless and cold, and drifted into her chest. There was no vision this time, only clarity. A ringing silence. A knowing beyond words. Senso was watching when she rose. "Well?" he asked, tilting his head. Kagami-hime met his gaze. "I saw myself. And I accepted it." The old kitsune smiled, a true smile, without guile. "Then go, child of water. The truth is yours. May it never blind you." The forest gave no farewell. Kagami-hime stepped beyond the edge of the echoing silence, and the instant her foot touched the boundary, the trees behind her vanished like breath in cold air. What had been forest was now only mist and memory. The hush receded, replaced by the distant rumble of thunder. The air grew heavier, the wind sharp with the scent of ozone. Before her stretched a long, narrow plateau, leading ever upward toward a jagged silhouette crowned with storm clouds, Mount Horai no Kaminari, the peak of the storm serpent. Lightning flickered along its summit, cold and blue, branching like veins across the belly of the sky. Thunder rolled with such depth it seemed to rise from the bones of the earth. This was the last path, the hardest ascent, not only in height, but in spirit. Here, the final of the 3 sacred essences awaited her: valor, the spirit of resolution, forged not in rage but in unwavering intent. The legend said that atop this peak lay the soul of Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword. Not as an object, but as a flame hidden in the heart of a storm. A flame that could not be claimed, only kindled within. Kagami-hime stepped forward. With each pace, the wind screamed louder. The path narrowed to a blade's width, the cliffs falling away into bottomless chasms on either side. Rain began, not a downpour, but icy needles, slicing sideways. The ground beneath her feet turned slick and treacherous. Still she walked. The mountain tested her. A great wind rushed from the gorge, nearly lifting her off her feet. She pressed low, gripping stone with trembling fingers. She murmured no prayers, only breathed, in, out, hold fast. Her spring water pulsed faintly at her side, keeping her grounded. Hours passed. Time became unmoored. Dark clouds thickened above. The sky dimmed until it resembled twilight. And then, a voice. Not thunder, but a sound within it. Turn back. It came from nowhere and everywhere, rattling her ribs. You are water, it said. You cannot climb fire. You are reflection, you cannot withstand impact. You are not made for storms. Kagami-hime raised her face. Her hair, soaked and tangled, clung to her cheeks. Her hands trembled, but she did not stop walking. I am not here to be what I was, she said through chattering teeth. I am here to become what I must. A blast of lightning struck the cliff beside her, searing the air white. The stone cracked, splinters flying. A path ahead collapsed, forcing her to cling to a narrow ledge. She pressed forward, scraping knees, her breathing ragged. At last, she crested a rise, and beheld the summit. It was a vast plateau carved by ancient winds, its stone scorched black and silver. Pillars of twisted rock rose like broken spears. Lightning arced between them, a crown of cold fire. In the center of it all, coiled around a jagged spire, was the serpent of storms. It was not a creature of flesh, but a mass of writhing shadow and crackling lightning, its body formed from storm cloud and void, its mouth a chasm lined with jagged light. Eyes, 6 of them, glowed like dying stars. It rose as she approached, uncoiling with a thunderous hiss. Its voice came not from its throat, but from the storm itself. You carry light. You carry truth. But here, neither matters. The wind howled. Courage is a lie, it roared. Resolution is a mask. In the face of annihilation, there is no valor, only delay. Kagami-hime stepped forward, her small form dwarfed by the monster, her robes soaked, her limbs quaking. I am not brave, she said, her voice soft but unwavering. I am terrified. But I am still here. The serpent reared back, lightning crackling around its horns. You would face me with words? No, she raised her hands. From her gourd poured a stream of water, pure, glowing with the light of the magatama and the mirror. It splashed onto the blackened rock, steaming as it met the storm-charged ground. The serpent hissed, recoiling. I face you with will. The serpent lunged. But Kagami-hime did not run. She stood firm, palms outstretched. The storm struck her, not with flesh, but with the full weight of despair, visions of loss, of futility, of the end. She saw herself buried beneath ice. Her spring shattered. The darkness consuming all. But beneath the pain, she held fast to a single truth: she had chosen this path. Not because she was strong, but because it was needed. She screamed, not in rage, but in release. A pulse of light erupted from her chest, not blinding, but absolute. The storm paused. Within the gale, the serpent faltered, its coils unraveling. The lightning dimmed, receding into its core. The thunder quieted. And there, where the serpent's heart had been, hovered a flame. Small. Blue. Flickering. The essence of the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. Kagami-hime reached toward it. The flame did not burn. It entered her chest like a second heartbeat, hot, steady, relentless. Where the magatama gave warmth, and the mirror gave clarity, the sword gave something else entirely. Conviction. She knelt. Exhausted. Soaked. Trembling. But whole. The wind slowed. The sky brightened. The summit, once a place of fury, now stood silent. Kagami-hime had gathered all 3 essences. And far below, in the earth's deepest hollow, the Yami-no-Ryū stirred. The mountain did not let her go easily. Though the storm had quieted, the descent from Mount Horai no Kaminari was a long one, and Kagami-hime felt every ache in her limbs. Her sandals had worn through to the soles. Her hands bled from gripping jagged stone. Her breath came slow, but her resolve, freshly kindled by the essence of the Kusanagi, carried her onward like an invisible current beneath her feet. The path downward wound through ravines scorched black by ancient lightning, past petrified trees that still crackled faintly with storm energy. There were no birds, no yokai, no kami. Only wind and silence, broken only by her footfalls and the quiet slosh of the water in her gourd. And far below her, though she could not yet see it, the world had begun to tremble. It started as a murmur in the rivers, subtle, a stuttering in their flow. Then, trees in the lowlands began to twist, not from drought or blight, but from something deeper, a rot beneath the bark, a slow forgetting of how to be alive. Sacred places once resonant with divine presence fell silent. Shrines stood hollow, their protective spirits gone or corrupted. Children wept without knowing why. Dreams turned sour. All over Ashihara no Nakatsukuni, the Oboro Yami seeped upward. It did not rise as fire or flood, but as entropy, a slowness, a smothering, a deep and ancient forgetting. And in the earth's deepest cavern, the place where ley lines converged and the blood of the world met its bones, the Yami-no-Ryū, the dragon of darkness, began to awaken. It did not roar. It breathed, a sound like all sound being undone. A reversal. A sucking in of warmth, of memory, of meaning. And as it breathed, the land around its lair, deep beneath a dormant volcano known as Mount Sumi-no-Hara, the plain of sins, darkened. No sun reached that mountain's flanks anymore. No animals dared graze there. No rain fell. At its base, a chasm opened. And into that chasm, as if called by fate itself, Kagami-hime descended. She arrived at the foot of Mount Sumi-no-Hara 3 days after her descent from the storm peak. Her steps were slow, but her heart beat steady. The light within her, a fusion of the 3 sacred essences, glowed faintly beneath her skin. She no longer doubted it. It was simply part of her now. The land surrounding the mountain was barren. The grass had withered to ash-colored tufts. The trees here leaned away from the volcano, their bark peeling in long strips like skin shedding from old wounds. The very air trembled, not from heat, but from pressure, the kind that made the ears ring, that coiled in the chest and made the heart feel small. At the mountain's base, she found the chasm. It yawned open like a mouth, rimmed with stone that glowed faintly, not with fire, but with absence. The light here did not reflect. It was swallowed. No sound echoed. Kagami-hime stood at its edge for a long time. Then she reached for her mirror. The polished stone had once shown her only surface reflections, but now it shimmered with the inner light of the Yada no Kagami. She held it out over the void. Nothing reflected. It was not a trick. There was simply nothing. She lowered the mirror. "This is the heart," she murmured. "The wound beneath all wounds." And she stepped into it. The descent was slow, and not entirely physical. At first, she followed a spiral path of crumbling basalt, lit only by the faint radiance of her own body. The light within her did not illuminate the stone, it simply pushed the darkness back a little, creating a bubble of clarity in the void. Then, the walls around her vanished. She did not fall. She simply was, suspended in a place with no dimensions. No gravity. No heat. No up, no down. And in that place, the Yami-no-Ryū spoke. Not with sound. With negation. It reached into her thoughts, not to speak words, but to undo them. Her name began to fray. Her shape trembled. Memories flickered like candles in a windless room. She saw herself, not as a spirit, but as an idea unraveling. You are a drop of clarity in a sea of forgetfulness, the Yami-no-Ryū pulsed. You cannot hold shape here. You are not real. I am not real, a part of her echoed, numbed by the void. But then, her fingers tightened around the gourd at her side. The spring water inside shimmered. It pulsed against her palm. She remembered the river maiden she had healed. She remembered the weeping spirit in the forest, to whom she had offered rice. She remembered the trials, the illusions, the serpent, the wind. Her breath returned. I am Kagami-hime, she whispered. Kami of the first spring. Mirror of the world's soul. She reached into herself and drew forth her light, not in defiance, but in remembrance. The darkness hissed. It shrank back. And ahead, she saw it. The form of the Yami-no-Ryū. It was not a dragon in the way mortals understood. It was emptiness given shape, a writhing expanse of shadow, with limbs and mouths and eyes that seemed to bleed into each other. It moved without motion. Its wings blotted out concept itself. And yet, within its vastness, Kagami-hime saw something else. A hollow. A wound. It was not evil. It was grief. The primordial sorrow of unformed things. She wept, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Then she stepped forward. The air inside the cavern, if it could be called air, was thick with a terrible stillness. It had weight, but no warmth. Sound had no shape here. Her footsteps did not echo. Her breathing made no noise. Time unspooled like a tangle of thread, directionless and infinite. And before her loomed the Yami-no-Ryū, the dragon of darkness, the smog of oblivion. It pulsed, not like a heart, but like a tide. A living, breathing vacancy. Its size defied scale, its body shimmered in and out of existence, composed not of flesh but of void. Where it passed, stone withered to dust. Its many eyes, voids within voids, drifted in slow orbit, none blinking, all watching. Its voice was not a voice, but an implosion of sensation that pressed into her bones. You are late. Kagami-hime stood at the cavern's edge, barely visible against the yawning nothing before her. Her form glowed softly, like a candle in a vacuum. I came when I was ready, she said, though her voice barely escaped her lips. Not to destroy you. But to see you. The dragon moved. Or perhaps it didn't, motion was meaningless here. Still, the sense of shifting attention was palpable. One of its void eyes focused on her, wide and consuming. You believe you can define me? I believe you have already defined yourself, Kagami-hime replied. But that definition was born of pain. The Yami-no-Ryū's form twisted. Tendrils of negation rippled toward her, not to touch, but to unravel. The air bent. Her skin trembled. Her thoughts slowed. She felt herself again beginning to fray, not just body, but spirit. Memories were being pulled from her like threads. A child laughing by her spring. The Kodama's blessing as she left the glade. The illusion in the fox forest that almost broke her. Fading. She fell to her knees, clutching her chest. The essences within her, benevolence, truth, valor, dimmed, like stars choked by ash. Do you see? The dragon whispered without sound. You were never real. You are reflection, not light. You are echo, not voice. You are a ripple. I am the stillness beneath. And in that moment, something deep within her soul nearly yielded. But not all of her. A flicker. A memory, stubborn and bright. It was the spring. The sacred water, bubbling up from the earth, clear and cold. Not powerful. Not forceful. But enduring. Always returning, no matter how many feet trampled it. No matter how many years passed. She reached for her gourd. Her fingers found the stopper. She opened it. And poured the last of her spring water onto the stone beneath her. It hit the ground, and shimmered. Even in this void, it held form. It gleamed like starlight caught in a drop. The glow spread slowly across the stone, branching like frost. Where it touched, the air changed. A sound, barely perceptible, returned, the trickle of water. The dragon recoiled slightly. Kagami-hime rose, though her limbs trembled. She held no weapon. Only the light within her, quiet, enduring, steady. "I do not come to defeat you," she said. "I come to recognize you." "I am the end of all things," the dragon hissed. "You are the fear of never having begun," she replied. The dragon lashed out. Tendrils of shadow surged toward her, but she stood firm. The light of the Magatama rose within her chest, a pulse of benevolence. She reached out, not to strike, but to give. Her hand glowed. The shadows hissed, but did not consume her. Another tendril struck, this time at her mind, visions of failure, of endless night. But her inner mirror, the essence of the Yada no Kagami, shone, revealing not only what the dragon showed her, but what lay beneath it: loneliness. Isolation. The pain of being unneeded. "You are not emptiness," she whispered. "You are loss. You are the memory of what could not be." Then came the last strike, a final surge, massive and mind-breaking. A thunderous pressure, as if the dragon were trying to collapse her spirit itself. And within her, the Kusanagi blazed. Not like fire. But like stillness that would not bend. She closed her eyes and stepped forward. Every essence within her pulsed in unison. With her next breath, she did not speak aloud. She simply was. Her presence radiated outward, gentle, but unstoppable. The void around her began to shift. Not crack. Not shatter. But bend. Her light moved like water through crevices of darkness, not destroying, but filling. The Yami-no-Ryū shrieked, not in rage, but in a soundless note of pain. Its form trembled, distorted. Its vast wings curled inward. Its mouths closed. Its void eyes blinked, for the first time. "What are you doing?" it cried. "I am not unmaking you," Kagami-hime whispered. "I am giving you shape." The Yami-no-Ryū's form twisted upon itself, tendrils curling like smoke drawn inward. Its many void eyes blinked again, then again, flickering rapidly in confusion, in something that resembled fear. But fear, Kagami-hime realized, was too small a word. This was a being that had never known boundary. Never known containment. It had simply been, a constant, formless unraveling. But now it felt something it could not comprehend. Shape. Her light moved like a tide, not attacking, not conquering, but filling. Where its darkness had once erased all meaning, her radiance did not oppose, it completed. Where the Yami-no-Ryū exhaled negation, Kagami-hime inhaled it with compassion and released it as clarity. Where it distorted memory into despair, she offered it the unshakable truth of who she had become, not a goddess of grandeur or dominion, but a vessel of integrity. She did not command the light. She was the light. She had gathered not artifacts, but sacred principles, benevolence that gave without condition, truth that revealed without judgment, courage that endured without pride. And now, standing at the edge of the world's wound, she did not cast these like weapons. She offered them, freely, without ego. The Yami-no-Ryū trembled. "You do not understand," it said, not in defiance, but in desperation. "I am necessary. Without void, there is only stagnation. Without decay, creation becomes rot." Kagami-hime's eyes shone, not with brilliance, but with tears. "I know," she said. "Darkness is not evil. Shadow is not the enemy. But you forgot balance. You grew beyond silence into suffocation. You became absence without contrast." She reached toward the dragon. Her fingers brushed a ripple of shadow, and for a moment, the void screamed. Then, stillness. The scream turned inward. The dragon curled around itself, its wings folding like an eclipse. Its enormous form pulsed, as if shrinking, not in defeat, but in acceptance. "I was born when the first kami cast off sorrow," it whispered. "I drank the pain they would not hold. I became what they abandoned. And that is why you matter," Kagami-hime replied. "But you do not need to be alone anymore." She stepped into its shadow. And from her body, from her spirit, from the ancient spring that still pulsed within her, even now, even here, came a surge of light, not like sunlight, not like fire, but like dawn. Gentle. Warm. Inexorable. It moved through the dragon's being. It did not destroy it. It defined it. The Yami-no-Ryū's tendrils slowed. Its wings stilled. Its many mouths closed. Its form coalesced, not into a beast, but into a shape. A vast, coiled silhouette of deep twilight, not black, not void, but dark like fertile soil. Its body shimmered with stars, not emptiness. Its eyes ceased to be swirling vacuums. Instead, they became deep wells of dusk, heavy, ancient, but no longer hungry. Kagami-hime stood within the heart of this coalescence. She reached out and laid a hand on the dragon's brow. And spoke the final truth. "You are not meant to consume the world. You are the space between. The silence after. The pause that allows the song to be heard." The dragon bowed its vast head. A ripple passed through the cavern. A shift. The walls no longer bled darkness. Instead, they echoed with something like breath, slow and balanced. The Yami-no-Ryū, reborn, began to dissolve, not into nothing, but into foundation. It flowed downward, into the roots of the world, into the magma, the bedrock, the ley lines. It became part of the structure again, not chaos, but context. Its vast, unknowable power sealed itself into the heart of the earth, not bound, not imprisoned, but transformed. And in its place, the cavern began to glow. Not with light, but with potential. Kagami-hime collapsed to her knees. She was not dying. But the work was done. Her gourd, once empty, now pulsed anew, filled with crystalline water, not from her old spring, but from something deeper. Its glow was multicolored, clear, silver, golden, deep blue. The water of balance. A soft breeze stirred around her. And from the mists beyond, figures emerged. The Tengu, eyes lowered in reverence. The Kitsune, tails trailing firelight, their illusions now still. Even forgotten kami, river gods, forest spirits, mountain voices, approached, awakened by the restoration. Amaterasu's light broke through the top of the volcano. A single ray shone down upon Kagami-hime, illuminating her small form with quiet grace. From within, she heard a voice, not commanding, but welcoming. "Come home, mirror of the world. Your task is fulfilled. The darkness is not gone, but now it is known. Now it has a name." And for the first time in what felt like an age, Kagami-hime smiled. The air shifted. It was not wind, not quite, but a stirring, as if the earth itself had exhaled after holding its breath for 1,000 years. Kagami-hime knelt in silence. Her limbs trembled, not from weakness, but from the stillness that followed immense motion. Her light, once a trembling ember, now pulsed steadily from within her. It was not dazzling. It did not scream its divinity. It simply was, a warmth at the heart, a glow in the bones, the quiet conviction of something whole. Around her, the cavern no longer loomed with dread. Its walls shimmered with faint blue veins of mineral light, like the first trickles of spring thaw. Stalactites overhead glittered like stars seen through dew. Pools of water, real water, formed where once there had been only dust and shadow. She had not destroyed the Yami-no-Ryū. She had invited it home. And now the land responded. From the rim of the volcanic heart, wind stirred, drawing in the scent of cedar, of earth, of pine needles warmed by sunlight. Kagami-hime rose slowly, steadying herself with one hand on the rock. Her robes, once torn and darkened, had dried in the warmth of her light. Her gourd, once emptied in her final act, was full again. Not with the same water from her spring, but with something deeper, infused with the 3 divine essences she now carried. She walked toward the path from which she had descended. It was no longer a chasm, no longer a mouth swallowing all sound, but a passage, gently curving upward, bordered now with crystalline moss and flowering ivy, as though the world itself had waited for this moment to bloom again. And as she stepped into it, the first birdsong returned. Distant at first. Then closer. A warbling echo through stone and air. Life reclaiming the silence. Her ascent was slow but unlabored. The mountain no longer fought her. It bore her upward like a cradle. When she emerged at last into daylight, the sky was not only clear, it was radiant. The sun had broken through in full strength, but not scorching. Its light bathed the mountain in warmth without weight. Clouds drifted in high, trailing golden edges. The trees that had once withered near the volcano's base now stood upright, their bark dark and rich, their leaves trembling with green fire. Kagami-hime stepped onto the black stones of the summit trail. Waiting there, as if they had known the moment of her return, stood the Tengu and the Kitsune, silent and still. Karasu Tengu no Teisho was the first to bow. He did so without flourish, without ritual, just a deep, wordless motion of respect. His fan, once clutched tightly in vigilance, now hung at his side. "You are changed," he said. "So is the world," Kagami-hime replied. Behind him, the old Kitsune, Senso, padded forward on silent paws. His tails no longer flickered with instability. Instead, they moved like reeds in a breeze, anchored, calm. "You did not vanquish it," he said, his tone filled with wonder. "You made room for it." Kagami-hime nodded. "The world needs contrast. But not corruption. Darkness must be the backdrop, not the devourer." There were no further words. None were needed. They parted for her, and she walked between them. Where her feet touched the ground, wildflowers began to bloom. Pale white blossoms. Golden violets. Soft, fragile life drawn toward her presence like moths to a hearthfire. And behind her, the wind began to carry her scent, not that of perfumed divinity, but of clean water and cedar, the breath of the first spring renewed. She descended through villages she had never seen, and yet they bowed to her. Old women wept as they knelt. Children rushed forward with offerings of rice and plum petals. Monks dropped their staffs and pressed their heads to the soil. Not because she demanded it. Because they felt it, her purity, her transformation, the return of balance. In each place, she poured a few drops from her gourd into their wells, their rivers, their shrine basins. And in each place, the water cleared. Illness retreated. The haze lifted. Flowers returned to sacred groves once thought barren. Even the yokai who lingered near crossroads, those twisted by grief, fled from her light or sat in silent surrender, remembering who they had once been. She did not chastise them. She simply walked on. When she reached the valley of her own spring, the hidden glade where her shrine had stood, she paused. It had changed. The old torii gate had been overgrown with moss, its lintel cracked. But the spring still bubbled. Weakly. Weary. Waiting. She knelt beside it and poured her gourd's contents into the pool. The water shimmered once, twice, and then surged upward in a fountain of iridescent silver and blue. Light danced across its surface. Birds returned to the trees overhead. Blossoms unfolded in seconds where none had grown for years. And in the heart of the spring, a reflection formed. Not of the sky. Not of her. But of the world. Alive. Breathing. Whole. Kagami-hime stayed there a long while. Not because she was hiding. But because even gods need to rest. She rebuilt the shrine not with gold or stone, but with her hands. Stones carried by children. Wood offered by grateful carpenters. A roof woven from cedar bark and sakura branches. Her torii gate was humble, but strong. She laid sacred ropes across it with her own fingers. She tied fresh shirta, zigzag paper charms, to every post. And at the center, where her altar once stood, she placed no idol. Only a mirror. Still, clear, reflecting nothing, until one stepped close enough to see themselves. Word spread not as thunder, but as mist at dawn, creeping gently, softly, reaching every crevice of the land. First, it was the children. They came barefoot from nearby villages, drawn not by stories, but by instinct, their small hands clutching offerings of pebbles, flowers, and folded prayers. They stood before the modest torii gate and bowed without knowing why. Kagami-hime watched them in silence, seated beside her spring. She no longer glowed as she had during the descent from Mount Sumi-no-hara. Her divinity had become something gentler now, a hush in the soul, rather than a blaze in the eyes. "Why is the water warm?" asked a little girl, dipping her fingers into the spring. "It remembers the sun," Kagami-hime replied, smiling softly. The girl tilted her head. "Are you the spirit?" Kagami-hime did not answer. The girl left a petal on the stone and ran off giggling. By the end of the week, the children had returned with their elders. Old farmers knelt before the mirror at her altar and whispered names of lost loved ones. Warriors left their swords tied in white silk and placed them at the edge of the spring, not in worship, but in surrender. Shrine maidens brought broken amulets, hoping for guidance. None were turned away. Kagami-hime spoke little. When she did, her words were questions, not commands. What do you carry that is no longer yours? What do you fear in your own reflection? What would you become if you were not afraid? The pilgrims wept, often not knowing why. But they always left lighter. And the land responded. The air grew sweeter. Birds returned to places long abandoned. A once withered grove of plum trees near the shrine began to bloom, out of season. Its petals scattered on the wind and drifted as far as the western mountains. Travelers who passed through these fields began to dream of water and light, of mirrors and healing. They woke with tears in their eyes and altered courses, walking days out of their way just to find the source. By the end of the season, the spring had become a pilgrimage. Yet no road led to it. No map marked its place. Only the soul knew the way. One night, as the stars shimmered over her glade, Kagami-hime sat beside the spring in solitude. Fireflies drifted lazily across the water. Crickets chirped beneath the cedar trees. She dipped her fingers into the pool, watching the ripples cast distorted starlight across the surface. Footsteps approached, soft, deliberate. She turned to find a figure kneeling at the edge of the clearing. It was a Yamabushi, a mountain ascetic, clad in white robes streaked with mud and pine needles. His face was lined, not with age, but with grief. He bowed until his forehead touched the earth. "I come not to ask for healing," he said. "Only understanding." She studied him. "And what is it you seek to understand?" He lifted his face. "Why the world still allows sorrow. If you have saved it, why do children still die? Why do hearts still break?" Kagami-hime touched the water again, slowly drawing a circle in its surface. "Do you curse the moon," she asked, "for rising after the sun has set?" The Yamabushi was silent. "Sorrow was never the enemy," she continued. "It only becomes dangerous when it has no place to be seen. No mirror. No listener." She motioned to the water. "This spring does not reject sadness. It receives it. It gives it form. And when sorrow is seen fully, it becomes something else." The man wept. And for a long time, Kagami-hime simply sat with him. Not as a goddess. As a witness. In time, the shrine became not only a place of healing, but of remembrance. There were no festivals, no grand ceremonies. But when storms passed, villagers gathered at the edge of her glade to leave offerings, not to prevent disaster, but to honor the light that now always followed. When the sick were brought in stretchers, they were not treated with fear, but with reverence. "This one brings a story," the healers would say. "Let us receive it." Even the kami, once distant, returned. A river spirit, long dormant, emerged from its muddied streambed to bless the crops again. The kodama of the high forest resumed their dances among the treetops, laughing once more with rattling glee. And the kitsune, the kitsune, they came not as tricksters, but as guardians, sleeping curled beneath the shrine's eaves like foxes before a hearth. One season bled into the next. Years passed. But Kagami-hime did not change. Or rather, she changed only as the spring did, with each passing soul, each offered sorrow, each reflection given space. She was not worshipped in golden temples. Her name was not carved in court histories. But across the land, mothers taught their daughters to pause before a mirror and breathe. Travelers dipped their hands into clear springs and whispered thanks. And when someone wept without knowing why, others would gently ask, "Have you visited the shrine in the valley?" No one called it a miracle. But it was. It was late summer when the dream came. The moon hung low, swollen and golden. Cicadas chirped in the trees, loud enough to blur the edges of thought. Kagami-hime sat alone beside the spring, as she often did when the pilgrims had gone, and the wind grew slow with heat. Her hands rested on her knees, her eyes half-lidded, listening to the hum of the world in perfect silence. Then, without warning, the surface of the spring turned mirror-smooth. Not a ripple moved. Not a breath of wind stirred the grass. The world held its breath. And from the stillness, a reflection rose, not of Kagami-hime's face, but of another place, another time. She leaned closer. The water did not show her present self, but something else, a vision, not conjured by the dragon of darkness, nor sent by Amaterasu. This came from the spring itself. From the land. From the soul of the world, whispering back in gratitude. The image shimmered and deepened. She saw a village built along a stream, children running barefoot across stepping stones, women laughing as they hung linens in the breeze. A small boy knelt beside a basin, pouring clear water over his grandfather's wrinkled hands. No one here looked afraid. The air was clean. The wind gentle. The river ran sweet and untroubled. In the distance, a small shrine stood, no grander than hers. No offerings cluttered its steps. But at its heart was a mirror, resting on a plain stone. People came not to pray for fortune, but to reflect. A woman approached it. Her face was streaked with tears, her shoulders hunched. She knelt, stared into the mirror for a long time, and then smiled. Just a little. She rose lighter than she had come. The vision changed. She saw a temple, deep in the mountains, where monks bathed in sacred springs and chanted not to gods, but to the balance between. They carried water up in small clay jars and poured it into stone bowls at the mouths of other springs, connecting each source to another, a network of remembrance, a web of clarity. She saw a child, clutching a mirror shard, pressing it to their chest as they walked through a burning village. The flames did not stop. The pain did not disappear. But the child's eyes did not break. They walked forward. Then, she saw a forest, the one where the kitsune once tricked wanderers. Now it bloomed with silver trees and golden mushrooms. The foxes slept without fear. The illusions had not vanished, but had changed. They now showed people not their deepest doubts, but their deepest strengths, wrapped in dreams they had forgotten how to believe in. She saw a shrine maiden by a river in the Southlands. She poured a single drop of water from her own gourd into the stream, bowed, and whispered, "May your sorrow be seen." Kagami-hime wept. Not from sadness. From completion. The vision faded gently. The spring rippled again. The wind returned, brushing her cheeks like the fingers of a mother she never knew. The cicadas resumed their chorus. Above her, the moon climbed higher, casting silver light across the clearing. She breathed in slowly. The world was not perfect. Sickness still came. Death still visited. Doubt still flickered in hearts. But balance had returned. Not in dominance. In relationship. The darkness had not been erased. It had been given its place. That night, Kagami-hime dreamt for the last time, not as immortal dreams, but as water dreams. She stood upon a boundless lake, still as eternity. Across its surface drifted lotus blossoms of every color, white for clarity, blue for wisdom, gold for compassion, crimson for courage. Beneath the water, she saw reflections of herself, at each stage of her journey. The trembling girl in the grove. The weary figure facing the mountain serpent. The silent warrior inside the heart of darkness. And finally, the small Kami kneeling beside a spring with a broken mirror. Each one was her. Each one was enough. When she awoke, the sun was rising. The spring sparkled beside her, its waters dancing with motes of light. Pilgrims were already arriving, quiet, respectful, bearing no banners, no drums. Just footsteps, and questions, and hopes. Kagami-hime rose. She greeted them not as a goddess, but as a mirror. Still. Gentle. True. At first, there were no written words. Kagami-hime did not speak often, and when she did, her words were simple, a question, a reflection, a gesture toward the unseen. But silence, when genuine, has gravity, and those who knelt by her spring felt its pull, not as emptiness, but as invitation. Some left transformed. Others lingered, waiting to understand why their souls had stirred. One of them was a young monk with cloud-gray eyes and hands ink-stained from a life spent copying texts in distant mountain monasteries. His name was Shinran, and he came with nothing to ask, only a desire to listen. He arrived during the late autumn rains, when the petals had all fallen, and the moss along the springstones had grown thick and sweet-smelling. He sat beneath the cedar trees and observed. He watched the way Kagami-hime knelt beside the spring, how she met each visitor's gaze with the gentlest stillness. He wrote nothing at first. He simply breathed with the rhythm of the water. Only on the 21st day did he speak. What do you do when someone brings you a sorrow that you cannot hold? Kagami-hime looked at him and answered, then I let it pass through me. Shinran bowed. That night, he wrote the line on a strip of mulberry bark paper and pinned it to a cedar branch with a thorn. The next morning, it was still there. Others saw it. Others added their own reflections. A child's note, when I cried, the water didn't ask why. It just let me cry. A warrior's confession, the mirror showed me the man I was before I bled. A mother's prayer, may my anger find a place to rest. Soon, the trees around the shrine were papered in these fragments, simple, profound, unnamed. Pilgrims began calling them Mizunokotoba, water words. They were not laws, not commandments, but releases, petals falling into water. Shinran began collecting them. Not for fame. Not for doctrine. But because he feared forgetting. He copied them by hand, using a brush made from his own cut hair. He bound them into simple volumes with twine and bark. These scrolls, humble and unadorned, were taken by other monks, other travelers, to distant corners of the realm. They became known as the Sutras of the Silent Spring. The sutras spread like dew, not by force, but by absorption. Villages with no temples built listening shrines, modeled after Kagami-hime's own, no statues, no idols, only a mirror, a spring, and a place to kneel. In the capital, scholars puzzled over them. They contained no answers, they complained. Only more questions. And still, more copies were made. In mountain monasteries, monks memorized verses before taking vows of silence. In border towns racked by war, the sutras were read aloud beside dried wells, invoking not peace, but clarity, the kind that allows both grief and grace to sit side by side. A new term emerged, whispered in shrines and roadside inns. Kagami-do, the way of the mirror. Not a religion. Not a sect. A way of seeing. It taught no escape from darkness, only the courage to face it. It offered no salvation, only presence. And its followers wore no symbols, only carried a small shard of polished stone in their sleeves, or tied white ribbon around their mirrors at home. Some called them foolish. But others, many, many others, called them whole. Years passed. Generations came and went. Some believed Kagami-hime had ascended, returned to Takamajihara to sit beside Amaterasu once more. Others said she had dissolved into her spring, and that every clear body of water in the land now held a fraction of her presence. Still others claimed she had simply walked away, deeper into the mountains, to live in solitude, watching the world from afar. The truth was simpler. She remained. Just as the spring did. No banners. No declarations. Just the steady presence of a kami who had once held the darkness, and did not shatter. Those who found her shrine found no crowds, no incense. Only the wind. The trees. The mirror. And the spring. Still flowing. Still waiting. Still receiving. Above the clouds, above the sunlit peaks of Ashihara no Nakatsuki, beyond even the bright vault of stars, there lies a plain of light that does not burn. There, where no mortal wind reaches and no time runs forward, the kami of Takamajihara watched. The realm of the gods had always been a place of balance, gleaming halls of white jade and woven sunlight, suspended on wind and memory. Here, Amaterasu Amikami's radiance cast no shadow. Here, Susanu's wild storms raged only when invited. Here, Tsukuyami's moonlight flowed like a river through the groves of star-cherry blossoms, blooming always, falling never. But now, something had changed. The sky shimmered differently. The stillness had deepened. And in the palace of Amaterasu, where a mirror once reflected the order of heaven itself, the sun goddess stood gazing not at her own light, but into a basin of spring water. Within it, Kagami-hime's reflection rippled gently, seated before her modest shrine, accepting offerings not as tribute, but as trust. Around her, the high gods gathered once more. Susanoo, lord of storms, still wild of hair and fierce of eye, leaned against a pillar of wind, arms crossed. His voice, when it came, was quiet, an unusual thing. "She did what we never dared," he murmured. "She looked into the heart of the void, and didn't try to kill it." Tsukuyami, pale as distant frost, regarded the basin with unreadable calm. She reflected it. Gave it shape. The darkness feared being known. The gathered kami murmured among themselves. Some were bewildered. Others awestruck. A few, uncertain. "She was no warrior," one said. "No priestess," said another. "No avatar of flame or vengeance." "What, then?" asked a third. "What is she now?" And it was Amaterasu who answered, not with pride, but with a strange, reverent humility in her voice. "She is what comes after." The hall fell silent. She turned to face them, her golden robes shifting like dawn, her eyes soft but steady. "We crafted the world with force," she said. "Blade, light, decree. We carved the rivers, named the winds, placed stars in the sky. But our hands were too large to shape the smallest sorrow." She gestured to the basin. She did not fight for dominion. She did not cast her will like a sword. She listened. She was. She remembered, whispered Omoikane, god of wisdom, stepping forward. She held what even we forgot, that the first act of creation was not light, but stillness. Amaterasu nodded. And in the stillness, she made room for shadow, not to glorify it, but to give it place. And in that, she healed what we could not. A hush followed. Even Izanagi no Okami, the father of all kami, who had watched silently until now, finally spoke. "She carried what I once cast away." His words rang like distant thunder, soft, but irrevocable. "I turned my back on Yomi, on Izanami, on the sorrow of death. I fled from the void we ourselves birthed. But she, small, quiet, she returned to it. And brought it home." No one spoke. There was no need. The gods are many. They are fierce and radiant. But in that moment, they bowed their heads, not in submission, but in recognition. For they understood now. She had not defied them. She had completed them. Later, as starlight bathed Takamajiehara in pale gleam, Tsukuyami walked alone through the orchards of moonfruit. He stopped by a still pond, where no wind stirred the surface, and gazed into it. The reflection that met him was not his own. It was hers. Kagami-hime. Seated by her spring. Looking back, not through the veil of divinity, but as though she were beside him. Not judging. Not questioning. Just, seeing. Tsukuyami smiled faintly and bowed his head. "You've changed us, little spring." And far below, in the mortal realm, Kagami-hime looked up from her own pool, as if sensing eyes upon her. She did not speak. She simply closed her eyes. And in the breath between one heartbeat and the next, the distance between gods and mortals shrank, not with a thunderclap, but with a single drop of water falling into stillness. Generations turned like seasons. The tale of Kagami-hime, once passed in hushed tones between monks and pilgrims, began to settle into the bones of the land itself, woven into lullabies, prayers, and the everyday rituals of those who lived close to silence. In a village that stood near the great river Hinokawa, where reeds swayed like dancers in summer wind, a boy was born beneath a sky clouded with smoke. His name was Run. His father had perished in a border raid. His mother, though brave, bore a heart cracked by grief. Ren spoke little as a child, his voice always just beneath a whisper. The other children called him the ghost with sandals. But in the evenings, he would wander alone toward the sacred basin on the hilltop, the one said to hold the reflection of the moon even during the day. There, an old mirror rested upon a smooth stone. There was no shrine, no roof, no priest. Only the mirror, and a pool of water fed by a quiet spring. Ren would sit for hours, legs folded, eyes half closed, watching his reflection ripple in the breeze. Sometimes he cried. Sometimes he smiled. Sometimes he asked nothing at all. And always, the water answered in stillness. It was years before he learned the name Kagami-hime. A wandering mendicant passed through the village, carrying a small scroll. He unrolled it before a fire one evening, and the villagers gathered to listen. She was born of water that remembered starlight. She did not slay the dragon, she gave it a name. Benevolence is not mercy, truth is not certainty, courage is not victory. The words fell over Ren like rain. He did not speak for 3 days. Then, on the 4th morning, he rose and began to write. Others like him emerged. In the forests north of Fuji, a girl named Kana was born with a voice that broke whenever she tried to sing. Her mother, a shrine keeper, despaired. She cannot chant the rituals, she said. How will the gods hear her? But one night, the girl went to a spring hidden behind the temple. There, she saw her reflection. And she sang, not with sound, but with breath. Each exhale shaped a rhythm. Each inhale, a melody. The animals gathered around her. Her own mother, awakened by wind, wept in silence, watching her daughter converse with the world in a language older than speech. The villagers called Kana a Kagami-no-Ko, a child of the mirror. They began to listen instead of speak. Far to the west, in a city of tiled roofs and ink-stained courtyards, a scribe named Takuan began compiling a strange manuscript. It contained no lineage, no divine war, no cosmology. It was a collection of dreams, recorded from farmers, children, blind poets, and old soldiers. Each dream had one thing in common. They had met a woman at a spring. Sometimes she wore white. Sometimes blue. Sometimes she was young. Sometimes very old. But always, she listened. And when they awoke, they remembered what they had forgotten, that even sorrow needs a home. That even shadow casts light. Takuan named the book The Quiet Mirror. He did not finish it. He simply left pages blank at the end, for others to fill. And so the teachings of Kagami-hime, never preached, never enforced, grew like lichen, slow, quiet, strong. Children were taught not only to pray, but to pause. Scribes added blank pages at the end of scrolls, saying, "Leave room for what is not yet known." Healers placed mirrors beside the ill, not to reflect faces, but to catch the final image the soul gave the world before leaving. And in one distant monastery carved into sea cliffs, monks greeted one another not with bows, but with the words, "I see you. Be as you are." Kagami-hime never called herself a teacher. But she taught. Not with sermons, but with her being. She remained in her grove. Visitors still came, some weeping, some laughing, all carrying their own reflections in silence. And when she met their eyes, they always saw something they had forgotten. That even the smallest light, held steadily, is enough to define a world. It began, as most great things do, without ceremony. There was no eclipse. No trumpet of celestial decree. No thunder across Kagami-hime. Only a ripple, soft, unnoticed, passing through the soil, through the roots of trees, through the still surfaces of lakes and the deep wells of sleeping mountains. Kagami-hime awoke before dawn, as she always did, and walked barefoot across the mossy stones that ringed her spring. But this morning, something had shifted. The light had changed. The stars lingered just a heartbeat longer than they should have. The moon, instead of fading, held her place above the horizon, pale and patient. And beneath Kagami-hime's feet, the stones felt warm, not from sun, but from intention. She knew. The moment had come. Not an ending. Not quite a beginning. But a knot, a place in time where past, present, and possible all folded into one. She knelt beside her spring, hands resting gently on her knees, and closed her eyes. Her breath slowed. Her heart quieted. Then, from her sleeves, she removed 3 small objects, each one humble, each one eternal. The first, a tiny glass vial filled with her original spring water, gathered before her journey began. It shimmered faintly with starlight. The second, a polished shard of her mirror, cracked during the trial with the kitsune, yet never discarded. Its edge was smooth now, worn from touch. The third, a sliver of blackened stone from the summit of Mount Horai no Kaminari, struck by the serpent's lightning. It still hummed faintly with unspent thunder. She laid them in a circle before her. These were not relics. They were anchors. From within her, the 3 essences stirred. Benevolence, steady and warm, rose like a spring mist. Truth, cool and cutting, settled into her spine. Valor, fierce and bright, ignited behind her eyes. But she did not summon them to act. She summoned them to weave. Slowly, her fingers moved, not in gestures of spellcraft or divine command, but in the simple, ancient patterns of weaving, under, over, around. Like braiding reeds into a river mat. Like threading the first strings of a loom. Except she wove with presence. Each motion was a vow. I will not flee shadow. I will not seek dominion. I will hold light and dark together. And as she wove, the world responded. The spring surface stilled until it reflected not her image, but everything, mountains, trees, distant cities, lovers asleep in one another's arms, mothers singing to their stillborn sons, children laughing by the riverbank, an old man dying beside his faithful dog. It held them all. And above the spring, invisible to the eye but unmistakable in weight, something began to form. A pattern. Not of cloth or thread, but of spirit. A lattice. A net of breath and being, stretched across Ashihara no Nakatsuki. It touched the high mountains, where Tengu still perched and whispered their riddles. It sank into the old forests, where foxes curled beneath silver trees. It passed over fields of barley, where farmers paused mid-step and looked skyward, unsure why tears blurred their vision. It reached even into Kagami-hime, where Amaterasu looked up suddenly from her mirror and whispered, "Ah. She begins." Kagami-hime's body trembled. The essences within her burned, not painfully, but with completion. They were not leaving her, but rooting. No longer separate. No longer tools. She was not the bearer of benevolence. She was benevolence in motion. She was not the carrier of truth. She was truth in breath. She was not a vessel of valor. She was valor given form. And yet, she remained herself. No throne. No title. Just Kagami-hime. When the final strand was laid, she bowed low over her spring. Her forehead touched the stone. Her light dimmed, not from fading, but from settling. And with that, the weave was done. Balance had been anchored. Not sealed in a scroll or bound in a crystal, but breathed into the world. A pattern that would not control, but remind. A presence that would not command, but witness. Whenever despair rose too high, the wind would carry a hush. Whenever power swelled with arrogance, a mirror would crack. Whenever darkness threatened to consume, a spring would appear. And somewhere, a still voice would whisper, "You are seen. You are part of the whole. Do not flee. Reflect." The seasons passed gently after the weaving. Not in haste, nor marked by grand omens, only in the quiet rhythm of leaves falling, blossoms blooming, the wind brushing through cedar boughs with soft, familiar breath. Kagami-hime still tended her spring. She swept the moss from the stones with a branch of pine. She stirred the embers at twilight, brewing tea for the pilgrims who still came in ones and twos, bearing quiet questions. She answered less now. Not because she had grown distant, but because the silence had deepened. Her presence alone was enough. Children sensed it first. They no longer stared at her in awe, but leaned comfortably against her, like foxes curling beside a lantern. Elders who had seen dozens of summers came simply to sit near her, saying nothing, sometimes nodding as though hearing answers before they asked the question. Kagami-hime had become a mirror without glass, a spring that flowed even when dry. And then came the morning. The one where the birdsong was too still. Where the dew refused to evaporate. Where the petals of the plum tree remained suspended in air, as if reluctant to fall. She knew. She rose before the sun and walked the edges of her grove. She paused before the cedar where she had first received her vision from Amaterasu. She bowed to the mossy stone that marked the path of her descent into Yami's hollow. She stopped beside the tree where the sutras of the silent spring had once hung like paper lanterns in the wind. A single weathered page still clung there, fluttering gently. She smiled. At the spring, she knelt one last time. Not in prayer. In remembrance. Her hands dipped into the water. She touched her own reflection, no longer the youthful, ethereal maiden of old, but something softer, wearier, wiser. Hair silvered like rain-soaked ash. Eyes deeper than any well. She looked at herself. She saw everything. And then she released. It was not a death. There was no collapse, no final breath, no scattering of petals. Only a soft ripple. Her form dissolved like mist touched by sunlight, slowly becoming the very air of the glade. The mirror at the altar shimmered, not with light, but with presence. The water glowed faintly, then calmed. The trees bowed their limbs. The wind paused. And when it moved again, it carried a new breath, a whisper that would linger not in the ear, but in the soul. She remains. A child arrived later that morning. A small boy with dirt on his cheeks and a bamboo flute slung across his back. He approached the spring, wide-eyed. Looked around. "Where is the lady?" he asked aloud, voice thin with disappointment. No one answered. But when he knelt beside the water, he felt warmth bloom in his chest. He gazed into the mirror. And saw not just himself, but who he might become. He smiled. Not because he understood. But because he felt seen. And the flute at his side began to hum. From that day forward, no one saw Kagami-hime again. But she was everywhere. In the morning mist that clung to mirror lakes. In the first drop of rain that fell into cracked soil. In the cool silence that followed a weeping fit. In the mirror a widow kissed after lighting her final incense. And especially, most profoundly, in the hearts of those who chose stillness over fury, who listened before speaking, who held the world without needing to fix it. Not gods. Not priests. Just people. Carrying her forward. As breath. As balance. As a light too quiet to name. They did not call her a goddess. Not at first. The word felt too heavy, too distant. She was the lady of the still waters. The breath between storms. The one who did not turn away. Her name was spoken not in temples, but in kitchens, rice fields, and riverboats. Grandmothers passed her tale to weeping girls. Blind men told it to strangers who paid with tea. Wandering poets wrote her name in dust, then let the wind erase it. She became a story, and in doing so, she lived again. In the village of Natsun, a mother comforted her feverish son with a tale. Once, there was a spring that cried when the world did. A spirit lived there, so gentle that even shadows knelt. When the dragon of nothingness came, she did not fight it. She gave it a cup of water and said, "I see you." And the dragon forgot it was alone. The child, fevered and hallucinating, murmured, "Did she go away?" The mother shook her head. "No. She just got small enough to fit in your breath." In the harbor town of Hashigo, a merchant whose heart had been broken 3 times came to a well said to reflect more than just the sky. He looked in, and saw not his failures, but his younger self, singing in the rain. He returned the next morning and left behind his ledger, weighted with stone. A boy found it and read the note inside. "To the woman who taught me that losing does not mean unlovable." Far to the north, where the snow never melted from the high peaks, monks in woolen robes kept a fire burning year-round. It was not for warmth, but for listening. Each night, they sat in silence beside the hearth. When asked what they did there, they answered only, "We make room for her." In the capital, nobles argued over whether Kagami-hime had ever existed. Was she a kami? A mortal made divine? A poetic symbol for the healing of the land? Scribes compiled contradictory scrolls. Ministers proposed shrines. Scholars debated. In the middle of one such debate, a girl who served tea to the court smiled quietly. That evening, she walked home beside the Kamo River and dropped a polished stone into the water. The ripples it made glowed faintly. In a fishing village, a funeral was held. The widow did not cry during the ceremony. She simply walked to the edge of the bay, knelt, and stared into a tide-pool. The village priest approached gently and asked if she wished to offer a prayer. "I already did," she whispered. "To whom?" She didn't answer. Only pointed to her reflection in the still water. Over time, the story shifted. Kagami-hime became many things. To the sailors of the Western Isles, she was the mist bride, guiding lost ships with breathless fog. To the farmers in the southern valleys, she was the seed whisperer, who taught the soil to forgive. To the fox spirits of the rewilded forests, she was the one who returned the trick, and in her honor, they left clear stones beside mountain paths for travelers to find. And to children everywhere, she was simply the lady in the water, who smiled when they cried and never asked them to stop. No temple ever bore her likeness. No doctrine ever claimed her name. And yet, she endured. Because the deepest truths do not survive in stone, they live in story. Because memory is not meant to preserve, but to carry. And because when the world forgets how to see itself, it will always find its way again by seeking a mirror. There is a truth older than the gods. Older than sun, sea, or stone. Before creation took form, before light and darkness were sundered, there was reflection. Not of faces or form, but of essence. And in that reflection, something stirred, the knowing that to see is to be, and to be is to hold. Kagami-hime did not disappear. She became that truth again. And the world, which once feared the void, now mirrored her memory in every quiet place. In a hidden glade where no road leads, the spring still bubbles. Pilgrims do not find it by maps, only when they are lost enough to listen. Some stumble in with grief. Others with guilt. A few with nothing but numbness. There, the spring reflects nothing at first, until the traveler kneels and breathes. And then it shows what was always waiting to be seen. There is no shrine. No incense. No priestess. Only water. And wind. And the quiet whisper of a presence that once had a name. Elsewhere, in the cities and across the fields, she is breath. A woman pauses in the market, moved by the sound of laughter between strangers, and her heart aches, for joy she thought forgotten. A young warrior, trembling before battle, sees his reflection in the blade, and it is not fear in his eyes, but steadiness. A midwife, wiping blood from a newborn's brow, hums a lullaby she doesn't remember learning. The child opens her eyes. There is knowing in them. And a teacher, before beginning a lesson, holds silence for 5 breaths. No one asks why. They feel it. She is there. She walks with us not in vision, but in recognition. In the old man who forgives himself as he plants a tree he will never see bloom. In the widow who leaves rice cakes beside the stream, for the lost ones. In the child who cups water in both hands and whispers, "Thank you." These are not rituals. They are remembrances. Of balance. Of mercy without expectation. Of truth without cruelty. Of courage that does not need to be seen. And in Takamaji-hara, the gods remember too. Amaterasu, when she rises, turns her mirror not toward herself, but toward the world. Susanoo, when his storms recede, listens for the hush that follows and bows his head. Tsukuyomi, when he casts silver upon the lakes, traces patterns only the still-minded can see. Even Yami-no-Ryū, now sealed deep beneath the earth, not as enemy, but as absence with purpose, sleeps in peace, knowing its name is no longer feared, but understood. The balance holds. Because one kami dared to kneel instead of rise. To reflect instead of conquer. To become a still spring in a world that feared silence. And if you ever find yourself alone, in grief or rage or doubt. If the stars feel distant and the night too thick to breathe. Find water. Any water. A cup. A basin. A puddle after rain. Gaze into it, not for answers, but to be seen. And you will feel it. A presence that asks nothing of you but your being. She will not speak. But she will hold you. And in the soft silence between heartbeats, you will know. The mirror has returned. The spring still flows. And you are enough.